In 2025, 71% of businesses are using generative AI. Only 8% of business leaders consider themselves AI experts, and up to 60% of businesses haven't had any AI training at all. If you're a business leader at the very beginning of your AI journey, then this video is for you. I'm going to cover the two most critical areas where you need to focus your attention to bring yourself up to speed so that you can lead AI with confidence. The first is around adopting an AI mindset. I'll go through that and I'll give you some practical examples and tips that you can use to enable that. And the second is the very basics of AI. So understanding the technical terms that you need to know. Now I'll say this isn't going to be a technical video. This is for business people. And so I'm going to try and make it as accessible as possible. But there are just a few areas that you really do need to master and get your head around in order to lead with confidence. My name is Quinton Hiini, and this is episode 1 of a 6-part series on the QAI for Business framework, which I created based on my real-world experience leading global digital transformations and helping companies adopt AI to generate real business value. Okay, so let's dive into the first part, which is adopting an AI mindset. So what I mean about this is business has changed fundamentally because AI has been introduced. And so the old ways that we used to think of business problems can now be enhanced with AI. Okay, so let's dive into adopting an AI mindset. So this is probably one of the most critical parts that you need to master, because what it does is it helps you frame your business problems and your leadership skills in the new context of how AI has changed business. So the 3 main ways that you can develop an AI mindset, which we'll dive into in the first part of this video, is first understanding how to frame your business problem. The second is knowing what AI is good at and what it's not. And the third is knowing how to evaluate and interpret the outputs of AI. Knowing how to frame your business problem. So the first thing I'll say is that AI is a powerful tool, but it's not a mind reader. And so it's really important when you're working with AI that you think about how to properly frame your business problem so that you can get the best results out of AI. It's important to know that the outputs that you get are only going to be as good as the inputs you put in them. So here's a few tips that you can use when you're trying to frame your business problem. So most of you would have heard of SMART before. However, this is a really good way to sort of frame your business problems when you're working with AI. If you haven't heard of it before, it's basically a framework that helps you think through your business problem in a way that's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So if you take into consideration those aspects, it'll help you frame the business properly. I'll give you an example. An example of a poorly framed business problem: we need to use AI to improve sales. First of all, it's not specific, lacks business context, so it doesn't really incorporate the underlying problems that you're facing. And third, it's solution first. So this is assuming that AI is actually going to be able to help them. It could be that the problem is actually to do with the employees, it could be to do with internal processes, leadership, these kind of stuff. So a better way to frame this problem in a SMART context is: we will reduce customer churn among our gold tier subscribers by 10% over the next 2 quarters. So you can see there that it's specific about who you're targeting, and also there's a time frame there as well. We'll achieve this by building a predictive model to identify the top 20% of at-risk customers each month. Again, in there, you're specific about what AI's role is in this, and so that's also really helpful as well. And then which our customer success team will engage with proactively. So there as well is adding another level of realism, because you're incorporating real people at your organization and real context. So the next important thing to understand is what AI is good at and what it's not. So AI is really good at many things, but it does still lack the human context that you have as a leader. And so this means that there are a few weaknesses. Some of the most critical ones for you to keep an eye out for are contextual and nuanced understanding. So you can't expect AI to understand the full context of your business. It might not know, for example, that you're going through an organizational restructure or that there's a big change in the industry unless you specify these kind of things. And another thing is that it often lacks genuine emotional intelligence. AI models are trained on lots of data around how humans interact, these kind of things, but it does lack a genuine contextual understanding of these kind of things. And so that's why it's really important that you understand those. And you understand those limitations when you're working with AI. True originality. And so AI models are coming up with some really cool stuff, but really what they're generating is based on things that they've been taught. They're not quite at the point yet where they're able to come up with brand new creative things. And so that's where you need to fuse your own creativity as a leader into the inputs that you're using with AI. And another problem that a lot of people stumble upon is that AI isn't necessarily good at long-term context. So there are tools like Google Gemini that has a really large contextual window, but what you find is that sometimes what you were talking about at the beginning is lost by the time that you get to the end of it. And that's particularly common if you're sitting there for hours working on a problem and you're adding all sorts of context, that kind of stuff. It can kind of lose the train of thought. And again, that's where you need to put your own judgment there. Another thing that it's not good is solving all business problems. Again, it comes down to not having the full context of your business, your organization, the people in your company, the culture, these kind of things. You can feed it this information, but it just doesn't have the full solution. But let's talk about the things that AI really is good at. So some people like to think of it as AI as being an extremely intelligent intern who's read every book on everything. And so they're able to do things like give you a good summary, save you a lot of time because they've already read things. However, you're probably not going to give this intern responsibility for making critical decisions. But what they can do is they can automate repetitive tasks, they can enhance productivity, they can give you really good drafts and summarize information and pull together research, these kind of things. But again, just be careful and remember that AI is a tool that you need to use in combination with your own leadership, your own experience, and your own contextual understanding of your organization. And the third thing I'm going to focus on to help you create that AI mindset is to learn how to critically evaluate and interpret AI outputs. And again, it's important to think of those weaknesses of AI when you're doing this. But one of the key things that you need to be careful of, and you're going to hear this word a lot, is hallucinations. So what hallucinations are is when AI literally generates an answer that sounds correct, but it's not. It's completely made up. So a hallucination could be something as simple as saying that a restaurant's open on a night that it's not. Or it could be more convincing and talk about statistics that are completely made up. The thing is, hallucinations are real and you need to be careful of them. You also need to make sure that your employees are careful of them as well. And the way to do that is just to make sure that you're checking the outputs and you're applying your own level of common sense and context over what you're reading there. Typically, what I like to say is that people are responsible for their AI outputs. And so you need to do the due diligence to make sure that you're checking, you're cross-referencing, and that it makes sense. So I'm going to give you a couple of extra expert tips when it comes to adopting an AI mindset. The first is create your draft yourself. So what I find is a lot of people become a little bit too dependent on AI to come up with a full solution and it lacks the context. And so what I always do is I start mapping things out by myself. I draw some diagrams. I brainstorm a little bit with AI. I ask it to validate facts, this kind of stuff. But I do try to make sure that the initial grunt work is my own and that AI verifies, supports, and augments my outputs. Try as much as possible to communicate and include context that you think would normally be implied. For example, they may not know that you have a board meeting coming up in the next couple of days. So that there might be good context to add there. Another one is making sure to choose the right tool for the right task. So we'll go into this in a bit more detail in a future video. So not all AI tools are good at the same things. Some things are good at generating text, others are good at generating images. Some are better at processing large quantities of data. So you need to make sure that you're using the right tool. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail in the second part of this video. And I think the other bit of advice is try your best to keep up to date with technology changes. So you can either sign up to daily blogs or newsletters, things like this. Alternatively, you might want to try and make yourself an agent or a task and where you get daily updates on the biggest things that are happening at AI. All right, and so the second part of this video, I want to focus on understanding the very basics of AI. So I know for a lot of you, these technical words that have been flying around can be a little bit intimidating. They certainly were for me to start with, but I'm going to go through the top 6 that you really need to know. And even if you just memorize these will give you a good basis to not feel so lost in conversations around AI. So the first one I want to talk about is generative AI. So you hear that a lot. What generative AI means, it's an AI that will generate an output. So there's various types. There's text, there's code, there's pictures, videos, all of these kind of things. But that word, generative AI, simply means to generate. Another word that you're going to hear a lot is large language models, or just language models. So what large language models are, so a large language model is an AI that's trained on massive amounts of data to understand, summarize, and generate human-like language. Now, you've probably heard of a lot of popular tools that incorporate large language models. So for example, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Microsoft Copilot, GitHub, etc. These all incorporate large language models. I will call out that they are not necessarily large language models because that's one part of them. If you think of ChatGPT, it's a bit more like a Swiss Army knife. So in it, for example, you have large language models, you have the ability to create images, etc. But that large language model is the AI behind it that helps you generate that language. Machine learning. So this one can be a little bit scary. You don't need to know how to develop machine learning models, but you do need to know what they are and what kind of things they're used for, what you might be able to use them for in your business. So essentially, machine learning is when computers find patterns in data, and those patterns make predictions and recommendations. So to give you some example, you would have seen in Netflix or Spotify, you get made recommendations based on your previous choices. Same with Amazon, for example. It sort of determines what products you've looked at in the past to recommend ones for yourself. So these are becoming more common, and it's also becoming more common for companies to create their own machine learning AIs. For things like chatbots, sentiment analysis, this kind of thing. So again, you don't need to know how to make these, but it is important to understand what that word machine learning means and what you might be able to apply it for. So the next one is RAG. Now, this is becoming more and more common. You're going to hear about it a lot more, particularly in a business context. It's called RAG, which means Retrieval Augmented Generation. So what this essentially means is it's like an LLM, but what it also does is it pulls information from your own data sources. So for example, it might be able to access your SharePoint, or it might be able to access your own personal documents. And then what it does is it retrieves that information, it augments it with a large language model or other tool, and then it generates a response. So what you're getting there is the addition of trusted sources. This is becoming more and more common, and some really good examples. Sonnet agents is one that I've used before, which I really like. And Notebook LM is an example of one that you can use on your own, you might have heard of. But also ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot and other big players like this give you access in their enterprise plans, where you give them access to your internal documents, and they use that to generate answers as well. All right, another one that you're going to hear a lot about is AI agents. So there's a lot of buzz around AI agents at the moment, and some of it's a little bit confusing. Essentially what we mean is AI's ability to break tasks into steps and then carry them out, sometimes in a single app and sometimes with multiple apps. There's two key types of agents at the moment. One is single prompt agents, which are more common, and that's essentially a series of steps that you tell an agent to make. For example, you might want to search the internet, and you might want to summarize, then you might want to turn it into a table, you might then want to turn it into a PowerPoint, you might then want to put together a Q&A session based on the information that the agent has gathered. That there is a multi-step single agent. On the other hand, which you probably hear a lot more about, is the multi-agent workflows. And so this is where you have one AI that talks to another AI who goes and books a restaurant, and then a third AI makes a decision based on your choices. It's essentially orchestrating workflows with multiple different AIs. So what I will say is that there is an impression right now in 2025 that multi-agentic workflows are easy, etc. They're not. And right now, you still need developers, you still need service designers, you still need a bunch of people to try and pull these together. And you also need to make sure that you're making sure these deliver value, real problems, this kind of stuff. So just to summarize, you'll hear a lot about agents. Know that single agents are the most common, and you can start using these right away. Multi-agentic workflows, there's a lot of potential there, but do know that it's not as simple as just writing prompts. You need to pull together people in order to make those work properly. And the last key thing you need to understand is prompt engineering. So I'm not going to talk too much about it in this video. I'm just going to let you know what it is, because I do have a separate video on prompt engineering. But essentially what prompt engineering is the art and science of constructing well-written prompts or instructions to get the best possible output from your generative AI. What I mean by this is just learning how to write the instructions that you put into AI in a way that's going to give you the best outputs. So it's making sure that you have the right context there, the right level of details, making sure that you're telling it to take on a persona. For example, you might want to say, I need you to be a comms expert with 10 years experience, or it could be, I need you to be a legal expert or a lawyer that focuses on economic law, but essentially giving it some kind of persona so that it has context. Giving it specifics around what sort of tone you want, around what sort of time frame. All of these things we were talking about earlier with regards to smart, these things apply as well. So it's about framing your prompts. Again, I had a full video on those and I can show you how to do that afterwards. But this is really important that you start learning, because the output that you get is only as good as the input you put in. So if you put in something that's confusing, that's broad, that doesn't have the right amount of detail, doesn't have the context, you're going to get a weak answer. Even worse, you might get a misleading answer, and you have to be really careful of that. All right, so before we end this video, there are 3 more areas that are super critical, but we'll cover them in the following videos. The first is knowing how to connect AI with value. The idea of creating products that deliver value is still relative with AI as well. And so the fundamentals of connecting AI to value are still there. Third is understanding how much work involved. So with AI being new, it's very easy to underestimate how much work is required from a data perspective, from a development perspective, but also a change management perspective. This is really quite significant changes sometimes. There's a lot of cultural resistance. And so making sure that you're understanding the full scope of the work is super important as well. And again, we'll cover that in one of the next videos. And the final thing is just not underestimating the change management effort. Research indicates that 10% of success with AI is algorithms, 20% is software, and 70% is actually the change management aspect and the people and the processes and that kind of thing. So that's super important, and we'll go into those in more detail in the next videos. If you found this video valuable, please do a couple of things. You can download the QAI for Business framework in the link below. Additionally, you can follow the next 5 videos in this 6-part series where I dive more into how to manage this from a leadership perspective, connecting value, change management, these kind of things. And also feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And finally, I'd like to just give a shout out to the sponsor of this video, Alexandra McCulloch. Ngā mihi kia koe e te tuahine. All right, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.